Have you ever seen a water flea? They are these minuscule, translucent spiny creatures. Imagine a baby with a twisted, broken spinal cord and a bulging stomach, and you'll understand. These adorable little organisms can only be seen through a microscope, and they dwell in acrid swamps and filth-infested lakes. The reason I know this is because I collect them. It's not a job or anything, I'm not a scientist. It's simply something that I have a great fascination with, a fondness if you will. My habit is not limited to just crustaceans. I get worms too. Horsehair worms look like strands of long hair in the water, dark in color, like your own hair in a plug hole. They twist and writhe. We have flatworms too, a truly unique invertebrate, soft-bodied. Their heads look like pins. Well, you get the idea. I collect parasites. Recently, I discovered a parasite that I had never encountered before, the primary screwworm. And let me tell you, it's one evil, detestable bastard. It is a worm that will literally screw you from the inside out, leaving you a mess of rotting flesh, scar tissue and deep, putrefying wounds. It thrives off the body of a warm-blooded mammal. It feeds off the muscle tissue, picking it apart like a well-cooked chicken bone. I have seen what this thing can do to cattle. The process is swift, agonizing, and death occurs within a matter of days. It is inconceivable. I can only imagine what it can do to a human being. I have another hobby, you see. It's currently tied up, laying in its own vomit in my basement. The process has already begun. The primary screwworm larvae is easily ingested through water, and a bone-dry human body deprived of fluid will drink literally anything. It begins in the intestines. They start off looking like flea bites and quickly turn into open, oozing, galvanized wire cuts. These little maggots multiply once they get inside, and within a day or so they make their way through the kidneys, the heart, the lungs, just devouring organ after organ. The party really kicks off when they get to the brain though. Once they get there, it's over. They attack the neural tissue, rendering the host virtually a vegetable. Next comes the spinal cord. Instant paralysis. The pain neurons in the brain are still active, and they fire away the nervous system endlessly like lightning bolts. A very painful, torturous death occurs. I have a day job, a crappy cashier gig in a generic supermarket. Not something I'm invested in. I think I know how to make it interesting though. I know how I can make it exciting. I think it's about time that I released a screw you worm. I used to know a girl called Maggie. We used to call her Maggie the Maggot. Why, you ask? You could probably hazard a guess that it had something to do with maggots, and you'd be right. Maggie the Maggot used to suffer from a condition called myiasis, something she was born with apparently. Poor maggot Maggie used to just ooze maggot larvae from every orifice of her body. They'd squirm and writhe in her eyes, crawling out and falling into her lunch. I couldn't imagine how many maggots poor Maggie consumed. No one ever wanted to go near Maggie. They'd avoid her like the plague-ridden monster that she was. They'd give her odd looks when she walked past, leaving maggots in her trail. They'd hiss and sneer at her while stepping on her maggots, squishing them with their shoes. Maggie never deserved any of it. It wasn't her fault after all. I tried to befriend Maggie. I was the only one that didn't detest her for her maggot-ridden ways. I even tried to befriend her maggots. I'd stroke them, let them wriggle in between my fingers. I'd even feed them, but after a while the kids started to pick on me too. and it wasn't something I wanted. Kids will be kids after all. They don't comprehend the effects their cruelty can have. So I stopped talking to Maggie. I stopped caressing her maggots. Instead, I joined in with the others. I watched as they tormented her, holding her down and shoving her maggots down her throat. Everything cruel that you can think of, they did to her. All the while, Maggie never said a word, never protested, not once. Instead, I'd see her grinning ever so slightly. A smirk would envelop her face, and tiny little maggots would crawl out from the crevice of her lips. They'd slither around her mouth, and every once in a while her tongue would pop out like a chameleon and she'd eat them. That was when I realized that Maggie the Maggot was planning something monumental. On the day it happened, I was late to school. I had only just managed to make it in for the lunch hour. The afternoon seemed so painfully ordinary, so absolutely nondescript, that the events that eventually unfolded now seem like a dream, a nightmare if you will. I strolled into the canteen, and that was when I saw all the vomit. Within it there were splatters of blood and squirming maggots. So many maggots. Bodies of my classmates lay strewn all over the place. Their stomachs burst open at the seams, their insides decorated with sinewy viscera, the soft-bodied larvae squirming and crawling within. Maggie the Maggot stood in the middle of the room. A deranged, detestable smile spread across her larvae-stained lips, and she spoke. Now they're all like me. When I saw the first ant crawl across my retina, that was when I decided it was time to see the doctor. I had no idea where it came from. I woke up one morning, and my eyes were suddenly a haven for these little six-legged soldiers. What were they doing there? What did they want with my eyes? These were the sort of questions I was perpetually asking myself. The doctor was no help. He berated me, told me that I was wasting his time. There were no ants in my eyes, he told me. Fucking liar. Donald, you come here every week worrying about something. And every week, it's not real. It's real this time. Can you please just do your fucking job? He rolled his eyes like he was dealing with a petulant child. The fucking prick. Fine, but this time, it's the last time, Donald. He pulled out his ophthalmoscope like it was some sort of weapon and used it to shine a light into the inside of my eye. A moment of silence passed between us as he peered into the window to my soul. I observed him with my other eye, the good one. I watched him as his expression changed from indifference to concern. What the fuck was he seeing? His eyes widened a little, panic leaking into them like spilled tea. What is it? It's nothing, Donald. Everything is perfect. He ushered me out of the door, fast. On my way out, I could have sworn I saw him smile. Feeling crestfallen, I went home. As the days progressed, things got worse. Have you ever touched your own eyeball? That feeling of dry skin touching a hardened yet moist surface. My eyes were fucking vibrating. There is no other way to describe it. I stood in front of my mirror for days on end, just staring into my blood-red orbs. The crimson veins looked like the warped branches of a tree. Every now and again, I would see a small, black ant wriggling across the whites of my eyes. I pleaded with them. Please, just go away. Every day they would double, triple, quadruple. Pretty soon, my vision was nothing but ants. I decided my eyes were no longer of any use to me, so I cut them out. I started with the right one. I held it in the palm of my hand, like a little grape. Then I squeezed. It popped quickly, like a pimple, and I felt a cold, gooey liquid leak onto my quivering fingers. It was sticky, like glue. I felt something stir in the hole where my eye used to be. Something big. It emerged from my empty eye socket, its 6 legs brushing up against my loose skin. Thousands of other little spindly legs followed. Then I heard a voice so deep and grating. It felt like someone was rubbing sandpaper against my eardrums. "We will never let your kind step on us again." I have this fixation with maggots. I bet that's something you don't hear every day, but here we are. It's not an ordinary obsession and isn't one I've had for long, but the story I'm about to relate to you all is paramount in understanding this compulsion. Not only am I obsessed with maggots, I collect them and I dissect them. This is all to understand what happened to me. You see, I must understand the reasoning behind my encounter. It's all I live for these days. My name is Martin, and I am from London. That doesn't matter so much, but I thought it prudent to give some context before I delve into what happened to me. I am 35 years old, and I used to work on the London Underground. Used to is important here, because it's imperative that you remember that I no longer work there. I no longer do anything, really. Not after my encounter with the hag. My job wasn't glamorous by any means. I was essentially a bin man, collecting rubbish left behind by commuters throughout the day. My job involved a lot of night work. I covered Old Street Station, one that doesn't operate throughout the night, so after 11 p.m. that's when my shift would start. I would go around both the southbound and northbound trains and I would collect all the crap that people had left behind. Londoners love to litter. It was never anything too exciting. My black bags would be filled mainly by coffee cups, discarded newspapers, and food wrappers. Occasionally, I'd find something of value like a book or a wallet, but otherwise nothing of import. It was a boring job, to tell you the truth, but I wasn't invested. It was just something that pulled cash into my bank account every month so that I could enjoy the finer things in life, like a pint on a Friday night. Anyway, getting off track here. The reason I'm here, the main plot of this story, happened on one of those mind-numbingly boring nights. I normally have music on when I work, because I can't stand the eerie silence that permeates throughout the deserted trains that I service. Anyone would get creeped out doing what I did, so yeah, music helped a whole lot. What I did had become almost ritualistic. I would always start at the front of the train and work my way through to the back. It would take about 2 or 3 hours to traverse both trains. The first half hour of the shift proved to be uneventful. I had only picked up around 3 coffee cups and a scarf that someone had left behind, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A reflection in one of the windows. It was an old woman. She sat with her head down on one of the seats in the far end of the carriage. Her face was obscured by her hair that fell about in messy clusters about her hunched shoulders and back. At first, I had thought that perhaps she had fallen asleep or something. This does happen, not very often mind you, but I have seen it. "Excuse me, miss?" I asked, suddenly confused by the fear that dodged my voice. She didn't respond, but instead started to sway, ever so slowly from side to side. I'm not gonna lie, this freaked me out quite considerably, and I started to back away, about to go out and find someone else, anyone else that could help. All of a sudden, I didn't want to be there alone. At that moment, she started to croak. It's hard to describe the noise that escaped from her, but it was throaty, like someone had been scraping her tonsils with a butter knife. It was disturbing, but it completely froze me to the spot, and I found myself unable to move a muscle. Her swaying head fastened in pace. She was throwing herself from side to side. Her grey hair flew wildly in all directions, and yet I still couldn't see her face. Then, all of a sudden, she stopped moving. She cocked her head as if sensing something, as if sensing me. I regained my composure and was about to leg it out of there as fast as possible, when a pale white hand shot out of her ragged robe and grabbed me by the wrist. Her grip was so strong, I found that I couldn't free myself no matter how hard I pulled. "What do you want?" I asked meekly. A brief silence passed before I heard that throaty sound again. She seemed to be trying to speak, but no words were coming out, none that I could understand anyway. Then her hair parted, as if touched by the wind, and her face was revealed to me. I recoiled in horror at the sight of her. Her eyes were crudely sewn shut. I could see dried blood where her eyelashes were supposed to be. The tone of her skin was deathly pale, with a hue of magenta, like she'd been dug up. Her mouth was open slightly, askew, and as I stared into her horrifying face, she opened it. From within, she spewed maggots the color of vomit. They dropped and slithered down her chin onto the floor. Even though she didn't have any eyes, I knew she was staring deep into my own. She looked down, and I did too. The maggots, the writhing and slithering mass of them, were forming words. Before I knew it, they had spelled out something that struck terror deep within my heart. "Everything you hold dear will be taken away." Then quickly they morphed and spelled out something else. "She starts in 5 days." I know this is going to sound insane and completely unbelievable, but it happened. She then exploded. Blood, guts and viscera covered me and the inside of the train. I think I couldn't move for a few minutes, but at the time it felt like hours had gone by. When I looked up, the interior of the train glistened and gleamed like it had been cleaned. I quit my job the very same night. A lot of you are probably wondering what it all meant, and I did too for a while. For days following the encounter, I dreamt of her and the words that her mouth maggots formed. "Everything you hold dear will be taken away." Then, 5 days after the incident, my whole world fell apart. It started with my mother. One night when I was asleep, my phone rang. It was my sister. She was hysterical, babbling on about maggots. Apparently, our mother was found dead in her home. Her throat had been slashed from ear to ear. Stuffed inside were thousands of squirming maggots. The police were at a loss. There were no clues, nothing that led them to my mother's killer, but deep down I knew who it was. It was the hag. I hadn't even had a chance to arrange my mother's funeral before she took my sister. Catherine was found with her body all carved up, from throat to navel. I don't think I have to tell you what was inside. The police dubbed them both the works of a serial killer and worked tirelessly to find out who did it, but I knew they'd never find her. They couldn't find someone who wasn't of this world. I was a broken man after that. I had a joint funeral for both my mother and sister. I mourned the loss greatly. The grief I felt was a fathomless pit of despair, one that I knew I'd never crawl out of. But I was determined to do one thing before I ended it all. I wanted to find the hag and ask her why. I knew that evil didn't need a reason to be evil. Evil sometimes just was. Finding her again has been my only purpose, and I am determined. One of the only things she was unable to take away from me. So you see, this is why I do what I do now. I have to find her, and I have to find her maggots. No matter what it takes, I will avenge my family.